The ACN podcast is made possible thanks to the generosity of our listeners and sponsors, including the Agile Alliance. As a nonprofit membership organization, the Agile Alliance is an excellent resource to help you along your Agile journey. To learn more about the Agile Alliance and our other sponsors, as well as how you can become a sponsor or supporter of our show, please visit acnpodcast.org for more information. And thank you for your support. Good morning and good evening, everyone. This is the Agile Coaching Network. This particular webinar, as well as the live event podcast, is brought to you by Agile Alliance. If you don't know who the Agile Alliance is, please go up to agilealliance.org. We're a member-supported organization, so the membership helps to fund things like the Coaching Network and other different initiatives that we are running. The way that you participate on this call, we do have a few members that are here to basically get the conversation going, but by no means this particular call is about us talking. It's about getting a conversation with the group. So with that, let's go ahead and get started like we normally do. We normally start off with something from the Narrative Project. And the Narrative Project is this program that we've been running at the Alliance for roughly about a year and a half now, where we're collecting stories from community members and asking just a very simple open-ended question, which is, tell us about your Agile adoption. And we don't pretense it. We don't try to get them to say, give us a bad story or give us a positive story or other. We just keep it as wide open as possible, and using a process known as sense making to have them self-signify the stories after they write the story itself. And those develop into big patterns. Those patterns, then we mine them for exemplar stories that kind of represents a big pool of other stories. And this particular story that handpicked this week, it comes from the environment area within the sense-making framework. And as the story goes, and by the way, as we read this, we want to ask ourselves a question: how can we see less stories like this? Because this is not exactly a very nice story. But here's the story itself. Waterfall or Agile, we never seem to have enough time for testing. Here we are at the end of the sprint with almost no testing completed. This is almost precisely what we used to do in our old waterfall process, push all the testing to the end. I thought Agile was going to help us fix this. Who would like to start off the conversation on this? Jorg, do you have something to add on this?
Yeah, actually, I have two takes on this, and I'll probably not talk about Agile mindset to begin with, but I'll talk about a bit of testing and verification mindset. The first thing, if it's not important to you, you're never going to do it, regardless of method. So make it important. Get maybe even your best people to own the responsibility for verification quality. Why I'm not saying testing, because there are lots of things that can be verified as well as tested. So there's test automation. Here's obviously Scrum. Please do it. It will pay off 100 times in the long run, but as well start off with being verified as a leader yourself. So if you do something, you organize a meeting or something, get feedback. Say, how did I do? What can I do different? And make it clear that that is actually testing of your method. And getting feedback, because then suddenly this becomes highly important. And get definitions of done in early or at a certain level of verification to your acceptance criteria in the stories. If you don't tell them that it matters, you're not going to get it. And the last thing that I have to say is, if you only notice this at the end of the sprint, you're still in waterfall mindset. You should have noticed probably, let's say at least at halftime.
That's a good point. Ruth, what are your comments here?
Just reading through this, it just highlights that this team probably needs more training. They need more coaching. They need to understand how to start the testing at the beginning of the sprint, and what that collaboration between the people that are doing the testing and people that are doing the developing, what does that look like? How do they start testing at the beginning? What can they do to prepare themselves for the testing at the beginning of the sprint, so that they get out of this mode of waiting for testing at the end?
Now, when you say what type of training would you recommend here? I mean, if you think of most of the training that I've seen, at least at the initial Agile rollout, they do talk about, the process of Scrum or the process of whatever hierarchy or method we're going to use. But when it comes to the technical methods that we use, that's rarely seen in certain training. What would you recommend?
Yeah, I guess I'm not talking about training classes that currently exist that are formal in Agile Foundations or even Scrum Foundations, but rather having a coach come in and when they observe this behavior, assuming they can get a coach to observe the team behavior, or even the Scrum Master as a team coach observing this behavior of waiting to test till the end. It's a kind of teaching on the fly, just seeing the need, talking about it maybe at the retrospective, and then teaching this particular concept.
Right.
So it's not really training, but more of a teaching moment through a coach for the team to help them overcome this behavior.
Right. Well, what I've seen is that, and I used to play a product owner for a while because I wanted to understand how that job worked. And so for about, 4 months or so, I was the product owner. And I really stuck to that definition of done criteria. And one of the criteria that we've always established in all of our user stories was that this was tested, it was refactored, it was, any of the failing, aspects of the story were repaired. And that's what gave it the merit to come into a review. If you've got that stuff done, you can come into our review. If you don't, then it's not done. Being really a stickler for that. And I know that there was a huge number of conversations with people that they go, oh, I just have one more test to run, or I have one more thing that I need to go do in order for this. Can I still come in and do the demo? And I would definitely tell them no. Tiffany.
Well, I was going to say, think about visualizing the workflow so that you can maybe see the bottlenecks as they occur or as they're about to occur to prevent them, and think about limiting work in progress. And also take a look at slicing the story smaller.
Okay, so you think that potentially that when they were doing the planning, they didn't actually account for in the Fibonacci numbers or however they did the planning, that they didn't give it a high enough number?
Well, I'm saying if it is a high number, then look at the story and see if there are ways to split it to make it smaller.
Okay. That's a very good point.
To this, one thing I do as a product owner in grooming sessions, especially with new teams, I ask them, how do you prove to me in the end that this story is really delivered? So I get them thinking of what they need to do to show that, yeah, that's really complete. And sometimes they come up with really astonishing things. That's a very good discussion to have often.
So, two comments. In my experience, I've had better luck when test cases and procedures became part of the acceptance criteria. So, team already thinking ahead when they are accepting the story, that what kind of tests need to be performed. And of course, to your point, Ray, not moving it to review until all those acceptance criteria are met. And eventually, as a habit, that definition of done, part of it was like, is testing complete? That's a checkbox that needed to be completed. The second aspect of it is I would like to understand what the enterprise testing strategy is. Now I'm using a very bloated word there. Essentially, is the environment conducive enough for like making testing easy for the development teams? Mm-hmm. If not, then from an enterprise level, like how do we bring about that automation? Looking from that perspective, why aren't people doing testing? Is it because it's too hard to test? They have to do it manually, or like, is it painful? Do we need some cross-functional training as one of the, I think Ruth was mentioning, if training be involved? Like, can we bring in a tool to help do that? So looking from that perspective, just making that testing an easy effort, as easier as possible, of course.
Right.
Yeah, and those would be the two things that I would look like from a team perspective and also from an organization perspective, like what is the testing strategy for the organization?
Those are all great points. I think also if you think from a continuous delivery perspective,
Correct.
that we should not be having, we should be delivering partial functionality and full functionality throughout the entire iteration, not just towards the end of the iteration.
Right. And I think too, I didn't get the name, but splitting stories enough including testing effort as part of your estimations, as part of your delivery, and commitment on that story would definitely help the team move forward from accepting testing as a habit.
Fully agree. Diane?
Yep.
What do you have to offer here?
All very good suggestions. I like them all. The only thing that I can add is the product owner being very aware of anyone having finished the story and even in stand-up saying, are you ready to review it with me? So that there's time, there's a problem to do some more work if necessary. So really putting a little bit of pressure on that point. The other one would be if you were using Scrum, what I've done when we've had problems in this area is have a mid-sprint check-in where we look at, hey, are we halfway done, including testing and done at this point with half of our work, or are we behind? And really put some pressure or awareness to the team that they aren't going to get everything finished if they aren't pretty close to that halfway mark. So if they're using Kanban instead of Scrum, the emphasis would be more on our stories getting stuck in testing, or are they pushing for done immediately, and keeping eyes on that they're not getting stuck, that everybody's not just picking up more development stories and testing is waiting until the end. So those are my 2 points.
And so on the Kanban board that you were talking about, are you referring to a greater visualization on that Kanban board? Because I've seen some people just do the, doing and done versus, what stage is it actually in from a feature perspective?
Exactly. Depending on what your need is to be able to visualize the work, you may need more columns in order to have that emphasis that testing is our bottleneck or development is our bottleneck or something else.
Okay. This is Joe. I just want to add one more comment if I can quickly. On that Kanban board, I think having work in progress limits is going to help too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Just put that thing, one or two things, and then only we can move the stories forward. I think that's going to force hand. But again.
Well, and back to, I think, Ruth's comment about training, one thing that I see as an anti-pattern all the time is that people who use Kanban do not follow the full principles behind Kanban by establishing WIP limits. And they'll just have... Go ahead. Sorry. No, please.
I would say for Scrum too, we should put work in progress limits. I mean, why not?
Agreed. Christine, what do you have?
Hi. These are all great ideas. I've tried a lot of these. We've done so much better involving testers in the product backlog refinement sessions and the sprint planning, so that everybody understands what is required going into the sprint. And still, we have this pushing it over the fence or into the column that says sit. And what I've been trying to do is get the team to, because we have a story that requires a database change, and then you load some data into the database, and then you present it on the UI. So that needs to be modified a little bit and presented. And then maybe there's some business rules on the UI. What I'd like to do to get the testing even further up into the sprint is to find a way for them to test the database change once that's done. Mm-hmm. And then when the UI is just sketched out, let them test that. When there's populated, let them test that. When the business rules are applied, let them test that. and we move it into a sit environment. So I struggle with that because they feel like the whole story has to be complete before you move it into the sit environment, which precludes like kind of testing that first database step, for example. And I'm wondering if somebody has some advice for me.
Well, I think, breaking them down into smaller chunks as people had talked about, which is, I know that some of the partial functionality or portions of a story coming in sometimes doesn't look that, as a demo, it's kind of boring, but overall, you're proving out some layer of functionality through the vertical slice. And I found that one of the things that you just mentioned in the beginning, which is in the story review itself, if we're actually asking ourselves the question, is this testable, and how are we going to, in the acceptance criteria, break that into sections so that I know that it's, partially functional here, it's going to be, this layer is enabled here, so on and so forth. So getting really, higher granularity on that acceptance criteria is a big deal there. Steve, are you there? What suggestions do you have?
I was going to say what someone already got to by the time I had my hand up, which is the WIP limits. So I'm very active in our town Agile community, like our meetup group, and the person who organizes it said they just massively changed the nature of their work very recently by imposing a WIP limit of half their number of developers. So if you've got 8 developers or 9 developers in a team, their WIP is 4 or 5. And the problem is that with 8 developers and 8 things in progress, everybody is taken up with something. So you have the illusion of speed and efficiency and work being done, but nobody's available for pair programming. Nobody's available for QA. Nobody's available to take a second look at something. Nobody's available for pull requests. And so they just forced themselves to have people available, and said it radically changed things. So aside from that, you already said this, I'm a huge proponent of definition of done, and I talk about it all the time and reiterate it. And one thing I've been saying over and over again in the past couple of weeks is every story is a murder mystery, and every comment is an action movie. So for every card or every story that we have, as many clues as we have to find the killer and solve the crime and close the case, that moves things faster. And that includes testing, acceptance criteria, verification, all of those things are part of solving the crime. And every last comment, just to go along with this, it's not really related to the testing, but the two go together in my thoughts, so I thought I'd share it. I've seen so many comments that are like, did some work on this database. That can't be the last thing you write on a card. The last comment needs to be, did some work in this database. I need Bob to give me an API key so that I can get the final XYZ done. So ball's in Bob's court, and this is the last thing I need to close out this ticket. So we've been talking about murder mysteries and action movies for a couple of weeks now.
I have a shirt that says that finding defects is like being involved in a murder mystery where you're both the suspect as well as the investigator. So I get that. Monica, what do you have for us? And then we're going to pivot to the next questions.
Yes. So can you hear me fine?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So a couple of things came in, and firstly, I wanted to, mention that sometimes if you have a very long sprint duration, then testing tends to get postponed towards the end. So I have experimented with shorter sprints, sprint as short as 1 week, and that really helped bring testing up front. So this is something worth exploring. Another is about test automation. Now, test automation, it really helped some of the teams that I worked with in increasing the number of test cases and making the testing process also much easier. Another thing is having the developers writing their own test cases. So in one of the teams, we had a separate tester, and the story was developed and then handed over to that tester. So over a period of time, we had the developers themselves pick up some testing skills, and the tester also picked up development skills. So we had a more cross-functional team, and that avoided this situation of testing being left over towards the end. And always the unit tests is the responsibility of the developer.
That is excellent. Those are all great ideas. I put up a poll in the background. 95% of us want to pivot. I'm sorry that if you had your hand up for this question, that you're not able to comment. It's just the rank of things. But let's go ahead to go to the main questions that we have. I wanted to address something that Margaret had asked at the end of the last session. It was very deep in the questions as I was looking through. And she didn't get the book titles that we were talking about last week. And I just wanted to say that if you go to the podcast, if you go up to, and the podcast is probably on most of the services that you listen to your podcast for, which is either the Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud. We're on most of those services. If you go to the very back end of the last podcast, you should be able to get that literature. We're also thinking about putting up a social site that enables us to talk more often than just once a month, because I noticed one of the questions up here is how often do we meet? I want to drag my manager in here, which I thought was a funny little thing. Yes, drag your managers in here. But we won't beat them up, I promise. But I used to be a manager, so I think that's okay for me to say that. The goal would be to get people to get to the podcast, and the podcast is where you find most of the good stuff from the last 32 calls. So the top question up here is from Anonymous. How to combine sprint reviews so that stakeholders can participate? With more and more of the scrums doing stand-ups, how do we scale ceremonies for best attendance? Who would like to start on this one?
Okay, so firstly, I would question, the need for scaling. So the need for scaling is telling me there are a lot of dependencies between the teams. So the idea is we reduce the number of dependencies so that people don't have to be present at so many ceremonies, because that then acts as a bottleneck, going back to the lean. That is the first point. The second point I have, have transparency in the sense of why do you need a particular person at a particular sprint review? What is the need are you trying to fulfill? Do you need some feedback? What are some of the other ways you can get those feedback? Could be in the form of physical boards, or it could be in the form of your virtual boards. And those virtual boards, are you having some key metrics being analyzed? Like, are you doing some data analysis on your board? And then those metrics can be much more consumable by the stakeholders. Because let's face it, we are all very busy, and not everyone wants to be in so many ceremonies at the same time. So question that need why you want to do that.
Ask a kind of a clarifying question on this. And this is just something that I found as we were starting to do an Agile adoption, that we had a high degree of learned helplessness in our organization, meaning that the reason that somebody wanted to review with a manager or reviewed with stakeholders and others was more about permission to do something that we had already talked about what we should be doing. And it was more of an affirmation, do I still have permission to do this, was sort of the root cause, versus I really need something from you for this. Have you found that scenario?
Yes, I have found that scenario, and that mostly happens when the performance appraisals are more individual based rather than team based.
Okay.
Then you feel you need manager's approval to take certain steps. And of course, it's a command and control situation.
To add a bit to the whom do I want to have in the sprint review discussion, and in my experience, it's always the really, really important thing and very often not done to have the business people in. And I've seen really great teams shift their entire sprint review actually by agreement to have this business people in. So that was a split organization, and let's say it was quite a travel exercise for business people to really join the teams. And it wasn't done in the beginning. Then it started off with, oh, that's a great idea. I can market this like this, and let's discuss. And that really transformed into a bit of sprint flexibility, not to get things done, but to get them presented to business. They really tried to adjust for the traveling schedule of the business people in the development teams, because they wanted this feedback and see that they were really doing something meaningful for the customer. So, and that's ask for the reason. Why do you need to be having people in? And if they really add to the efficiency of the team, make it possible.
I had this experience, and especially with like some teams that were more distributed with the stakeholders going around. The first thing is, and I think like it was coming from Kent back when it was like talking about having on-site customer, and it turned out to be not always possibility. But if the customer or stakeholder don't care enough to attend like once a week, once every sprint, that means maybe that product doesn't have enough value. But
interesting, yeah.
But we should be able to, like, I usually like to look at like a value stream, and the segments that are doing paralleling value stream, maybe they need to be aware of what they do. Like all of them, maybe we can combine their sprint reviews. So the teams are working on about the same thing, and it goes back and forth between them. Like sometimes one team take care of it, the other time another team. Maybe those teams can have the same sprint review, so they are aware of what each others are doing. Also, the parts of this value stream that are very close to each other, directly connecting, those two sprint planning and sprint reviews can be combined because they need to be aware of each other's work anyway. So I think those are the teams that there is a possibility to combine the sprint reviews. Another thing, the practices for distributed teams, we can use them. Video conferencing, good conferencing systems, because a lot of stakeholders are traveling a lot. But providing that, another thing that I found is sending out the agenda for a sprint review is really important, so that the stakeholders know if they really need to attend that meeting, maybe a day before the sprint review. So those are some of the practices I try to use.
And to add to that one is that I always would segment my agenda so that they knew what 15 minutes they needed to be there, that they didn't have to sit an entire hour waiting for this. They knew that if they came in at the quarter of the hour, that's when that was going to start. Raven, what do you have?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so for this one, I've even went ahead and so we can't get the participation always, right? And so what I've done at the place that I'm at a huge bank where you can't always get everyone that you would like to have in that room. Hopefully the decisions that needed to be made are before we get to the review. So it is my hope that the product owner, who is the voice of the customer, has already seen the work and approved it before we get across to the larger audience. So that's the hope there. We also record these. So we use some type of tool, WebEx, and we record. And, so with those who have not had the opportunity to come and sit in on this, we do place those recordings there along with some type of boundaries that states that, you weren't there for the sprint review, you're welcome to view this, but please don't think that once you view it that there's going to be an immediate change, right? So just like we're sitting there in the room and your offer suggestions is going to the product backlog for prioritization. So I've done that as well.
Shall we pivot to the next one? I think we had some yeses on this. let's go ahead and go to the next one. We get this question from time to time, and it's always a fun one to talk about, which is it essential for leaders, C-suite executives, to understand and act agile before that they have others in the organization do so? Who would like to kick that one off?
Let me kick it off with the simple thing. One leader needs to start, regardless of where he is in the organization. But somebody needs to get that mindset started, and hopefully then it turns into something bigger. It's helpful if it's not too low in the hierarchy, but it again depends on where you are.
This is Steve. I was going to say, I kind of echo the same thought. The answer to this question kind of doesn't matter because I can't control it. This is why I don't worry when I'm flying on an airplane, because my worry makes no difference to where that airplane is going. So if the C-suite is in on Agile, awesome. If the C-suite is not in on Agile, I can't do anything about that. I can try to influence up, but if you give me a universe where you tell me it's one or the other, either way, I'm going to operate the same way in my team anyway. I know what the C-suite really wants is valuable software, and I'm going to work with my team to deliver valuable software. And so, I don't want anybody to use this question as an excuse not to take some action. I've seen this discussion come up a lot. As Ray said, this is a perennial topic. I see people hesitate because they say, well, we can't do this because we don't have buy-in from the top or whatever. I think you have to just proceed with living out the values that you believe in this system. And I think that influence will be shown and people will recognize it.
Miranda.
Hi. So I've just recently joined an organization in the last 4 months it is more of a startup environment, so it is a little bit flatter than maybe your traditional organization. Having said that, they have had some real challenges around sort of consistency with deployments, software quality, etc. So I was basically brought in to have a look at the situation, understand where they're going wrong, and basically help. And one of the things that I thought could be useful for this team was Scrum. And it's something that we've started implementing. I think we're up to our 4th or 5th sprint now. And it's one of those things where we've done a lot of change management sort of activities around the process changes that we've made. So it's really been around plugging the benefits of what we're seeing. So obviously now we have a 2-week deployment cycle, so we can communicate to our sort of VPs, et cetera, that if they ask for something, there is a sort of 2-week turnaround on that, depending on where it fits in terms of priority. But we've also been celebrating our success in terms of, we actually have demoable software at the end of 2 weeks, rather than a bit of a higgledy-piggledy kind of mess where no one has any we've introduced predictability basically, and that's made everyone's life easier, especially at the higher levels of our organization. Mm-hmm. And I think, by celebrating that success, by showcasing the work that we're doing, and by trying to demonstrate that we can do things more consistently now, we've actually got a lot more buy-in. And I'm certainly not the most senior person in my organization, but I think once you start to prove yourself and build trust with your senior managers, that's where the real value of this comes into play, and where you get more of that support.
Sure. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So I have one more thing to add to that. So basically, I believe 60% at the team level, a team can move up to 6% of their efficiency, 60% of their efficiency without the need to get the executive approval and support. Of course, it's going to be slower, but they can get up to 60% over a period of time. After that, when it becomes interacting with other teams, going to business agility and DevOps and stuff and all that, from that time on, you need higher level support, and that's the time. So it's like the whole agile, like turning an enterprise into agility is an agile process. You need to take everything like small steps rather than taking all the teams being agile and then the higher level is not agile at all. You should have some support to pass that like 60-70% of the team's efficiency.
I agree.
This is Joe. One of the things, so we've done 2 rounds of transformations in the last place I worked. The first transformation was more like grassroots, like bottom-up approach. And you're right, like it hits a wall. And then priorities within the organization started to influence the way that the work was getting delivered. So the second round was involving the leadership at the portfolio level. It was like, pick your top 10 things. Where are we heading as an organization? I think that's where, if we need to deliver as an organization, maximize our efforts, then I think leadership definitely needs to be involved in making those tough calls, understanding the why. So agile ways, I wouldn't necessarily say the ways. If they have a Kanban board, I don't care. But if they can support the prioritization, if they can explain why, and that leadership storytelling is in place, where there is not much panic going on when we pivot in directions and things like that, I think I'm happy that the leaders are providing that environment for the teams to be successful.
Sure. One thing that I've noted, and this has been an ongoing thing that I've seen across multiple organizations, being a part of the Agile Alliance and having exposure to a lot of failures that happen in Agile, that a leadership change when it occurs, and if the leader that they choose to be inserted above these Agile teams have zero understanding of Agile, they tend to want to go move the team towards a different paradigm or a different way of moving. And I've seen those Agile adoptions collapse because of the lack of understanding from people in the executive suite. That pattern, I think, needs to be erased. So you don't have to be personally agile yourself. You don't have to have a Kanban board or something else. But if the organization has the belief that they need to be agile in order to meet their market, they need to hire the right C-level executives in order to facilitate that. That's my view on it. Why I think we're going to pivot. The next question: is it important to hone personal agility to enhance organizational agility? Who would like to start that one?
So Monica here. So I have personally experienced that when I was planning my work in a more agile manner, putting WIP limits on how many items I'm going to work at the same time, I understood agility in a much better, in a much first-hand practical way. So when I went out there and worked with the teams, working with them for to define their own agile ways of working, whether it's WIP limit or whether we're breaking up stories into smaller parts, it really helped me a lot. And WIP limits is one example, because somewhere in all of this is a coaching element also. You cannot coach anyone without an understanding of the difficulty that they might face, right? Otherwise, it's just like preaching, right? You have to understand what are the constraints, like time is limited. And in X amount of time, there are so many deliverables. So prioritization is very important. And this comes only from practice. Yeah, that is my personal experience.
This is Joe. I am a student of Ken Wilber's integral model, and first person, second person, third person, and extended to that, your mindset, your individual mindset, the processes that you work within, and the system, the environment that you execute within, and then the culture of the environment itself. All these 4 different aspects influence the whole agility, like how quickly we deliver results, how are we able to work with each other, or my own what do I bring to the table? So I wouldn't say important, less important, more important. It's definitely a factor for any agility to happen, that you bring your own personal agility to the table. And as a coach, I think my experience is, if I don't show my teams it's safe to fail, take my failure bows, all of those things, that I am a human as well, I would not be that influential or that impactful in any situation, in helping co-create solution for a problem we're trying to solve. So that's my view of the world.
So I think it's actually agility is that personal agility, what we call like the mechanical part of it. Like if we use Scrum, if we use Kanban, if we use any practice, we try to use that practice to increase like the culture of agility, the mindset of agility. And after a while, we might not even need any of those. Like even like I would say the most mature Agile team might not need a stand-up because they are already talking with each other enough. They might not need that. That's very mature team I'm talking about. So for example, if we implement a stand-up, if we implement sprint planning in a Scrum, if we are implementing deployments, all of that is to enforce and put a small structure to help people to come up with, to get used to this personal agility, and then later we can remove them and people will keep doing it like organically. So I believe it's like, one of them is affecting the other one, and then the other one will become the one. So that's how I look at it.
To add a dimension to this, I mean, I was a director at a big Fortune 100 company for a number of years, and I can tell you that, sort of this, I want you guys to go off and be agile versus I'm practicing this and let me show you how I do this. And what I found is as a leader within an organization, that a lot of people want to, they want to learn from you. And it's a little bit hard that when you're a part of an agile adoption and you don't learn how to get your own personal agility and order, and you're just kind of pointing at other people saying the agile is what those people do, versus it's actually beneficial for me to learn some of those patterns and adapt them into my own work as well. And what I found is that others would start to follow that. They'd follow that lead. And institutionalizing that into the culture, because there's key heuristics that are necessary in order for Agile to work, living up to the principles of Agile. If only part of the organization is doing that, regardless of what method you're practicing, it just doesn't come together. It's a half adoption.
Yeah, I agree with you. I work for a very big organization, and we've been trying to go agile, and it was declared at the top, but it's growing from the bottom. And I feel like we're doing a good job from the bottom, but then there are impediments that we can't really move ourselves. And one of them is resources. So at the top, they launch 1,000 ships, which is not being agile. And from the bottom, we come up with an impediment we can't move. Hey, we don't have enough. We have shared resources across these different projects, and it might look like it'll work if you go 50-50 with these people, 50% of their time here and there. But when the wheels start turning, it's really not. It's not efficient. We're not able to progress on either project in this way, and it's causing a big problem. Try to communicate that to them in business terms in ways that they'll understand it, but we just keep failing. Right. And I've even thought of, hey, maybe we could invite them to live the life on a Scrum team for a while and have them come to these stand-ups and really see what we run into when we have to go get a database ID, sure. A security ID from a different group because the organization, has that in a different group or what have you. And I thought, well, that would be a great idea, except everybody would probably try to cover up because an SVP is in the midst. And so I really struggle. How do we communicate these needs and impediments up the chain in a way that they'll do something about it instead of saying, oh, well, la-di-da, and never really address it?
Well, I think part of that, and I'll just tell you how my staff behaved after we went through our full Agile adoption. And this was an organization with several thousand people in it. By the time we got to noon every day, all of the daily stand-ups have taken place at the lower level. My staff would then get together, and this is 2 levels above, would be talking about impediments. What impediments are blocking people from getting their work done today? And we would divvy those up, and we would go work on those problems. Because if we had to think about of all of the things that we were doing, both on the strategic and the tactical side of our business, if we could go remove that impediment from the tactical side just by lifting a phone call and communicating to another division that we need that and get that solved, then we're going to increase this performance of the organization. The other thing was on the strategic side that as we were doing Agile, we suddenly discovered that, wow, we're laid out wrong as an organization. We really created these kind of fiefdoms within our group, and we really didn't have really good visibility to that until we started to really connect with the ground level of where work was being accomplished, Mm-hmm. And that realization for and I know we're kind of steering away from the personal agility side of this, but organizational ability to look at our system that we've designed and understand that that's something that we needed to iterate just as much as our product. To by the way, in certain cases, to our own stepping out of our own existing roles, meaning that we're now going to evolve our role into something different than what we imagined our job was going to be a year ago.
Maybe allow me to point to one point that to me is important in terms of personal agility, and that's asking for help. So you recognize that somebody can help you, and that's regardless of your position. If you can do this, you will enable the whole organization to be better because other people will ask, and you probably get a very smart answer and good support from somebody. And if you practice this, especially on the top level, being honest about things you can't do or you can't do as fast as people expect, but you enable others by asking, can you do this for me? That is extremely strong and for a lot of leaders a big challenge.
Yes, that is. Vulnerability is a big challenge always with leaders. Darn it, we are at the top of the hour. I hate when that happens because we do this thing every month, and I can tell you that this is probably the most enjoyable day of my month. So with this, couple things to note. If you guys are planning on going to Agile 2019, which is going to be in Washington, D.C., I saw the registration numbers. We're pretty much going over 1,000 already signed up, meaning that hotels, we got a certain booking of rooms and all of that. Get your registration done early because we're booking up pretty fast. If you want to come visit me, the next event that I will be at Agile Testing Days in Chicago. I'll have a talk there, and I'll also be manning the Agile Alliance booth that's there. There's a special discount that's available if you're an Agile Alliance member already. You just go up to agilealliance.com, go look under events, and you'll find the Agile Testing Days there. I would love if you go to that particular event. Please stop by, have a conversation with me. I always love having those conversations in person. At the Agile 2019, we'll also have the Business Agility Lab that I'll be helping to run again this year. Please stop by that. And then, of course, if we get an ACN event please stop by. Let's go, have a beer or some other lovely beverage or something and just have conversations because that's what I live for. So with that, let's go ahead and close for today. And I hope you guys have a great weekend and a great month. This podcast is provided by the Agile Alliance for educational and informative purposes only. To find out more information about the member-supported Agile Alliance, please go to agilealliance.org to find out about more upcoming events as well as different programs that are available to help you with your Agile journey.